Well, Intel's new 14th gen CPU has officially been unveiled and launched, and we get to talk about its performance stuff. Now, we're a little late to this video. Normally this video would have been up at 6 a.m. with the rest of the embargo stuff, but I had some additional testing I wanted to do because specifically some of the changes that they made to the power profiles and such with 14900K versus 13900KS is kind of interesting. So anyway, the point of today's video is to kind of show you how our stuff sort of matched up versus like the 7950X non-3D. They're very close to the price point of the 14900K slash 13900KS, but it's the numbers are new. There's new numbers. I mean, one of the funny things about doing the video a little bit later is the fact that some of the memes that make their way out are pretty hilarious, actually. So first and foremost, I'm gonna give some of you some time savers right now. If you were on a 13th gen CPU, there is zero reason for you to consider a 14th gen period, especially if you're considering an i7 for an i7 or an i9 for like an i9. There is such little performance improvement in this quote unquote new generation that it makes no sense at all. 12th gen and older might make sense. 12th gen is, believe it or not, the first gen of the E-core, P-core stuff. The IPC was great, but, well, it was okay, but not great. The jump from 12th to 13th was pretty big, but 13 to 14, they're the same, it's Raptor Lake, it's the same CPU. Even though it's called 14th gen, it's not really a 14th gen, it's a 13th gen plus. And Intel's not new to this. They did this with 4000 series, they did this with the 9000 series and the 8000 series. They just are notorious for, remember the 14 nanometer plus, they're doing it again. I think this is just a holdover because of Meteor Lake coming, which we don't even know what we're gonna be getting for desktop CPUs on that. But anyway, I digress. Rewinding, backing up here. Did some benchmarks, some fairly straightforward benchmarks, pretty much free utilities that you guys could download and compare yourself. I like to use benchmarks that are specific for being free. I think the only thing on here that might not be free is TimeSpy Extreme. It's just a CPU test. You can omit that one if you don't have it. Anyway, everything else that's on this list is free, so you guys can download it yourself and compare how your CPU is comparing to these scores. We did our 14900K test on our Falcon Northwest PC right here, which we'll be doing a separate video on. This is the first time we'll be taking a look at this SI's desktops. We've taken a look at like the Fragbox and the super small SFF PCs, like that's what I did the Expanse theme build on. And I've taken a look at their laptops, but I haven't taken a look at any of their custom built desktops. And these are not off the shelf like cases. These are cases designed in-house by them. So we'll be talking about that in a separate video, but it's worth pointing out there are a few things to consider when it comes to Intel reviews. Many motherboard manufacturers like to just take Intel's power limit suggestions, recommendations, and just throw them out the window, like ASUS being a major culprit of that. If you have an ASUS motherboard, but probably even 9th gen or newer, and you were to go into your BIOS, you would probably notice that your power profile setting or your overall power setting is set to auto let BIOS optimize. The problem with that is those are not taking into account Intel's limitations. They are ASUS limitations that ASUS puts in place to say, let's push the CPUs as far as we can. Now, considering all Intel K-SKU CPUs are unlocked, I think the mindset there is, hey, let's just let people get more performance for their CPU. The problem is it can make the CPU actually look worse than it is intended to when it comes to like power draw and thermals. And then boost tables kind of fluctuate all over the place based on what your cooler is capable of. So I took the 14900K, the 13900K, and the 7950X, and basically ran, well, the 7950X, we just ran with PBO on through all the tests, and that was it. We didn't do a PBO off. It's such a small, hard to measure difference with AMD, honestly. It automatically goes right up to its limits. But for the Intel CPUs, we did a stock setting, which is actually their performance setting, which is the 253 watt package limit, the 307 amp ICC max limit, 150 watt limit. That's actually 150 watt for the 13900KS. I don't have a KS, so it's 125 watt for my CPU. And then we ran the extreme profile, which Falcon Northwest has a profile saved on the motherboard. So it's a Falcon Northwest one where there's a 320 watt limit put in place, not the Asus Unlimited, which would just go to up to like 400 watts, to be honest, or probably even beyond, depending on what the Asus settings are. So I am running the Falcon Northwest profile, and then I matched that profile on the 13900K non-S to be the same 320 watt, the same amp limits and all that. So that way you can kind of see, obviously it's an unlocked SKU. So if you have the cooler for it, then you would want to push those limits if you want more performance. Now this is a 280 millimeter AIO in here. So it is, in my opinion, a little on the small side to try and keep 320 watts plus cool. Now again, remember, Intel was comparing it to the KS model, which has the same 6 gigahertz single core limit. Remember, that was 150 watt TDP versus 125 watt TDP for the 14900K and the 13900K. So I just want to point that out there. A true apples to apples comparison on these would probably be the KS. But unless they're coming out with a 14900KS, this is what I got. NZXT's build is a quick and easy way to get a new gaming computer. Build a gaming PC on your budget using the built-in configurator and see exactly how your favorite games will perform. Don't want to spec it yourself? Then choose from BLD's pre-configured player PC systems designed to fit your needs and budget. To see the full lineup and specs of the NZXT BLD Player Series pre-built PCs, follow the sponsored link in the description below. I found the 14900K stock settings at 253 watts was actually matching the 13900K when I put it at the 320 watt limit. So in terms of performance per watt, that shows that the 14900K is clearly doing a better job, because what we're getting with the 14900K is higher boost clocks of on average 100 megahertz to 200 megahertz per core on all core overclock at the same watt. So that means we're getting more performance per watt. So that extra speed is really equating to about 5% more performance. Now, here's the thing. This is where the frustration comes from Intel's marketing and naming, is the fact that it is, for all intents and purposes, not a 14th gen. It is not a 14th gen. This to me has 4770K and 4790K Devil's Canyon written all over it again, where it is the same process, and the process has improved. Therefore, they can push the clocks a little bit and be a little more conservative on the power limits and get more performance out of it and saying, oh, it's a new generation. It's not a new generation. It's just not. And so it's disingenuous to advertise it as such. Meteor Lake is a new generation. It is a new process. Everything about it is new. This is not. It really should just, in my opinion, should have been a 13950K and a 13750K. But I feel like they just are avoiding 50 because AMD uses 50s. So realistically, that would make more sense, a 13950K. Because it is about that much faster, to be honest. If we're looking at the naming convention there, I think it's just wrong to call it a 14th gen. Hell, you don't even have to update the BIOS in many of the motherboards to make a 14900K work, which shows you when it comes to the microcode and stuff on the CPU, for all intents and purposes, they're still viewed as 13th gen. It's just, it identifies itself as a 14th gen, so the BIOS displays it as such. Anyway, moving on. It is still impressive on the scores we're able to get out of the 14900K, keeping it under its TJ max. So overclocked, 320 watts, I was seeing 5.7 gigahertz all core with a 280 AIO, keeping it just under 100C. That's a lot to ask of a 280 AIO. Okay, and that was with the side panel closed and all that, by the way. So 41,102 in Cinebench R23. What's impressive though is the single core performance, obviously, because single core is going up to 6 gigahertz. It's going up to 6 gigahertz every single time we ask for single core stuff. 2311 on that. Cinebench R24 is an interesting test, the way it runs. It kind of, instead of like R23 where it just pegs the CPU 100% utilized from beginning to end until the test is done, it sort of like rapid fires the CPU rather than just pegging it. And then it moves the cores around on what, like the affinity on which cores are being hit the hardest. And I think R24 would be a better type of test for finding overclock instabilities because of the way the core clocks go up and down and up and down and up and down. Because that up and down motion of the core clock fluctuating and the voltage fluctuating with it during line load or load line calibration, calibration, right? Yeah. During load line calibration shows that if there's instability, it's going to happen in those fluctuations. When it comes to Blender, these are samples per minute. So obviously the higher the number, the better when it comes to samples per minute. They're just not that far apart. I mean, to be honest, the 13900K 320 watt is basically the same as a 14900K Intel limit, so 253 watt. So we're talking 70 watts of less power, which equals a significant amount of less heat, because the 13900K, or the 14900K at 253 watt was running about 78 C, whereas the 13900K at 320 watt was pulling 88 to 90 C. So better performance per watt, and because of that, we're seeing a lower wattage to get the same performance, better temperatures. So TimeSpy Extreme CPU test, they're all fairly similar. I mean, it's just another test. Geekbench is just another one of those utilities that kind of runs a sampling of different types of instruction sets to see how the CPU handles it. They do both a multi-core as well as a single core. 7950X performed well, but quite a bit behind on Geekbench. The 7950X is in here because in terms of pricing, it's like $30 away from the 14900K. Realistically, this CPU these are not bad CPUs. It's bad marketing behind it. It's trickery in making, I think, buyers that maybe are not as experienced or versed in Intel's naming might think this is quote unquote a new generation, but it's not. It's honestly not. And it frustrates me when it seems like it's just a marketing move. I think people would have been just fine with Intel calling it a 13950K. It would have at least been honest. Like I started to say, they're good CPUs. If you're coming from an old CPU, like 4000 series, 6000, 8000, 9000, even 10,000 or 10th gen, like 10,000 CPUs, 10900Ks and such, it's going to be a huge uplift in performance. The IPC has gotten good. The power draw has gotten really good, even versus the 10 core, 20 thread 10900K was a hot one. It was a hot mess. I had one of those. And it's going to be a huge uplift for anyone coming off of any older AMD CPU. I think the problem is, again, the naming behind it. You know, I see a lot of memes of people talking about going from 13th gen to 14th gen. That'd be a really dumb move. There'd be no point in doing that. Even going from 12 to 14 would be kind of a lateral waste. I mean, you'll see an uplift in performance across the board, but I don't know if you'll see enough uplift to justify the cost unless you get a really good sucker to buy your 12th gen for more than it's probably worth. Anyway, I don't know what else to say other than the fact that it's a CPU that exists, that has a name behind it. And it's up to you as buyers to determine whether or not 14th gen is worth it for you. I think Intel has to drop the price on 13th gen at this point, which to me would mean go buy a 13th gen. I mean, when it comes to Skunkworks, I'm really toying with the idea of putting the 14900K in there. I know I got a Z790 board, so I'm going to be putting a 13th or 14th gen in there. I'm probably going to put 14th gen in there just because of the higher performance per watt. So keeping the watts down and keeping the performance up is definitely going to be a nice to have, but not a must have. But I think for people looking at building or buying gaming PCs, they're probably, I mean, depending on what your budget is, these are almost $600 CPUs. So yeah, this is where you sign off down in the comments below on if this is something that you're even excited about. It's funny because it really just feels like 13th gen launch part 2. Honestly, it seems like more of the same, and I know that that's got people just bored with the entire genre, which is why I'm doing more PC builds moving forward and less of the discussion-y type stuff like this, because I enjoy building PCs. I don't care if I'm building a slow PC, a budget PC, a high-end ridiculous PC like Skunkworks. I just like building PCs. So at the end of the day, put whatever the hell you can afford in yours. I don't know what else to say.